Hey folks, Alan the Hot Rod Hippie here. This week's video we are going to be tipping a flange. I'm going to be demonstrating how to do this and talk about doing it a little bit. It's a really useful technique when you're maybe creating a wheel arch opening, you have to create a fender patch, you're trying to create an inner fender piece, you're working on a transmission cover, or you just need a curved flange. It's a very versatile technique and you can use it in a lot of different ways and forms. Let's check it out. So before we get too deep into this, what is tipping a flange? Well, tipping a flange is using a bead roller to go ahead and run your piece of sheet metal through there and create a bent flange. Normally when you think of bending a flange, you think of probably going to a sheet metal brake, locking that brake down and bending that flange. Creates a nice quick straight flange for you. Great. But what if you need to do it on a curve? Obviously the sheet metal brake isn't going to get the job done on a curved piece. So what are you going to do? The answer is quite simple. You tip a flange with your bead roller. Now that's a good point. You do need a bead roller to do this. You can do it with a manual one, though personally I've never done it. I always use the powered bead roller that I have from the folks at Mittler Brothers. And you're also going to need something like a shrinker stretcher to go ahead and reshape the flange when you're done. The reason for that is as you tip that flange, since you're on a curve and not on a straight line, that panel is going to want to distort a little bit. Whether it needs to shrink or it needs to stretch, the material is going to need to move to go ahead and maintain either a straight panel or maintain the curve of the panel you're looking for. As far as dies are concerned, I actually don't have technically tipping dies. What I have is this art roll die from Jamie Jordan's Signature Series that's meant for scribing and inlaying little tiny imprints in metal to create artistic designs. And then the lower of it I'm using is actually for a tank roll. It's to create a really light little rounded over edge when you're creating tanks. So these are just the ones that I use. The only reason I use this is I got the flange one here. It's got a nice sharp point to it and flat sides, so I can go ahead and tip the flange up against it, no problem. And the lower, I just need a good flat spot. You need a little flat area to support the piece, the flange, as you're tipping it. One common place where I'll use this technique is when I'm working with wheel arch openings. Maybe I've got a rear quarter panel that's rotted out right above the wheel well, or a front fender that's rotted out down at the bottom of the fender. Well, what am I going to do when I need to create the lip that returns into that fender? That's where tipping a flange comes in. Those all have that shape going on there. It provides strength to the opening, and it also gives an area for inner panels to spot weld onto the outer panels. So personally, when I'm, say, creating that quarter panel patch, or I'm creating that fender well patch, I'll generally create the shape of the patch panel I need first, then I'll move to tipping a flange. Tipping a flange is generally one of the last operations in creating a patch panel on whatever it is you're trying to do. Another common place where I might tip a flange is something like a transmission tunnel. When I'm creating that transmission tunnel, it generally has multiple stages to it. It has one main section that covers the body of the transmission, and then it flares up to the firewall to create the clearance for the bell housing of the transmission. All right, let's go ahead and grab some blanks of sheet metal, lay out the flange that we're going to tip, and then go ahead and do it. So I got these leftover pieces from when I did the video about the inner wheelhouse and rounding over the inner wheel lip to create a nice finished off look. I did a whole video about it. You can check out at the link up here. These are leftover scrap pieces, but I'm going to use them to go ahead and tip the flange since they already have a nice big curve on them. I went ahead and split one of these in half to give myself a couple pieces to work with. I'm going to go ahead and mark my flange on here. I need to mark where I'm going to tip with the tipping wheel to create the flange that I'm trying to create. Now the way that I personally do this is I take a tape measure and say I'm going to do a 3/4 inch flange here. So I'll mark a 3/4. I'll do this at various points along the panel until I get a rough layout of where I'm going to be. Then once I've got those random marks all along this edge, what I personally do, and I can't necessarily recommend this to you, is I just kind of hold the Sharpie and run my finger along this edge to go ahead and create my wheel flange line. So to bend this flange, I'm going to stick this into the bead roller, but I'm not really going to apply much pressure. It's light pressure. It just needs to lightly clamp the piece between the two dies. That's all it needs to do. It's a similar concept to if you used a C-clamp and you went ahead and clamped a piece down to your workbench and all you did is just manually picked it up and bent it. It's really the same idea, you're just doing it on a rolling device that allows you to go around a curve while you're folding that edge up. I want to go ahead and support the piece as close to that line as I can from the outside edge. The die is supporting the flange itself on the other side. I need to apply upward pressure continually as I feed through here to go ahead and bend that flange. I am functioning as the machine bending the material in this situation. one pass through, you can see the flange has started. Now I take my time and do it in stages and steps so I can control and make sure I'm staying on my line, because that's important to my finished product. Now with this specific die set, this is about as far as I can go. It's not quite a 90-degree angle because the face of this die is not flat. It's got an angle to it, so I can't tip this up as far as I might like to. To finish this off, I'm gonna go ahead and need to hammer it by hand with a hammer and dolly. Now I'm gonna go ahead and use this Covell dolly and my door skinning hammer to go ahead and finish off this edge by hand manually and get it done. I'm gonna go ahead and stick the dolly so that the edge of it gets right into the corner of that flange. Then I'll use the door skinning hammer to go ahead and hammer the inside of this radius, because it's got a nice radius face on it. It's gonna make that easier on me just to bend this around and get some of that shape in there. This is one of those times where having like 3 or 4 hands would probably be really helpful. Now I just went through there, you saw me do that, and I created the 90 on here. It's a little rough inside of here. I could spend some time with a hammer and dolly and clean that up. But honestly, you saw it was a little bit tricky for me to handle all this, especially it's hot in here, so it's getting sweaty. So what I would probably do is I would actually tack this piece to the vehicle where I wanted it, if I was sure that the shape was right. And then I would finish it off on the car, so if something was holding it, it'd be easier for me to hammer and dolly it. But you got the general idea here right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to the stretcher to go ahead and straighten this out. I don't want this much curve in it. I want it to end up with a very gentle curve when I'm done. That's arbitrary because this is not a real piece. I'm making this up, but I want to demonstrate to you how I would do that if I was trying to achieve a lighter radius to the finished piece. Now I've got the stretching side of my shrinker stretcher here to go ahead and stretch on this flange. Now you might say to yourself, but it's curved. How are you gonna fit it in there? It's a gentle enough curve that I don't have to really worry about it too much. It will create funky shapes in this flange, which I'll have to go through with a hammer and dolly and clean up a little bit for the finished product. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and gently and lightly apply even pressure with the stretcher dies all the way along this flange. First pass took some of that shape out of there, but not quite enough. You can see, especially down here at this edge, it's a lot heavier radius than I think I want. Now you can see I've got a much gentler radius to this, much more like a shape of a fender may be at the top of a wheel arch opening. You can also possibly make out, it's hard for me to tell on the camera, you can probably make out some of those little lines and divot points where the squared off jaws of the shrinker stretcher kind of dug into this curve, because flat versus curved, and it's gonna happen. So I can get that out with a little light hammer and dolly work. Again, I would do that on the car after I get the piece tacked in so that the piece is held. And that is my finished piece. Now, the overall piece got a little bit of a shape this way and a shape along the edge of this flange. This is just form up in here. It's from my actually applying that pressure upward on it. So really I can just go ahead and manually manipulate this back into a kind of a flat shape. It's not shaped, it's not being held by the shrinker stretch, so I can flatten that out and work with that. As with everything, I highly recommend pick up the piece, get to practicing, and just try it out for yourself, because that will really help you, allow you to figure out how this technique works. I just did it, and that's what taught me how to do it. There are other tipping dies on the market. As I said, the ones that I have are not necessarily the best things for the job, though they do work for me and have for years at this point. Something like Hammer Fab has a set that actually have a flat base on them that should allow you to get up to or almost to a 90-degree angle and a much larger flat lower. I want to pick up a set of theirs, I just haven't gotten around to it because the ones that I have been working for me to this point. Alright folks, I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you learned something here. It's a simple technique, but you can do a lot with this. This is a basic technique you should really nail down. Go ahead and drop the video a like if you found it interesting. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you thought of this video? Do you want me to elaborate on this technique more in a future video? Let me know in the comments down below. Check out the Patreon account, patreon.com/HotRodHippie. That directly supports this channel, allows me to bring you more content like this. I really want to do more of these metal shaping videos, but they are both time consuming, material consuming, tool consuming, and honestly, I need more space, so Patreon is a great way to make that happen. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all the content every week. Thanks for coming around, folks.